This past Thursday was the anniversary for what at the time there was actually no argument about was the largest outdoor attendance event for any pro wrestling card. It happened in Canada. It happened in Toronto, as a matter of fact, and it happened at what became known as the big event. But at the time, August 28th, 1986, was actually promoted as WWF Wrestling presents Hulkamania. And one man that was there, of course, you knew he was going to be there. So glad to have him back on the show. Dan the Mouth Lovranski. How are you, bud?
I'm doing good, Mike. How about you?
I'm doing great. You know, this all started, somebody posted on our Celebrate Wrestling Facebook page just a picture of the event and talking about it and what a big deal it was. It was a Mike McGuire, who's a big-time contributor on our page. And it had come up on Canadian History Aches, is what they call it. EHX, get it? And they talked about how it was the biggest wrestling event in history at the time. And you were there.
Yes, indeed. It was quite the spectacle, Mike. That is for sure. And I find it interesting, too, that even in this modern era, it's still like in the top 5 or 6 biggest events for a crowd ever.
And that's just it. You know what? Oh, gosh. I'm so tired of talking about attendance figures because everybody wants to be right about something these days. And, we heard about it with AEW, with All In and everything else. And, WWE. And, I mean, they've always been the masters of manipulating attendance numbers. But at the time, everybody agreed this thing was beyond a box office smash. Now, the official paid attendance number was 61,470. Estimates went as high as 70,000 to even a 74,000. And part of the confusion of this, Dan, you actually got caught up in as well, was that they had a huge ticket issue. What happened?
It's really weird. Yeah, it was incredibly insane. I mean, I didn't live in Toronto at the time. I'm in small town Ontario, and me and 3 other buddies pool all our money together, drive up here, because we're just so pumped. We're like, it's got every guy that we want to see is on this one card. So we're like super pumped. So we make our way up here, and we get to the gate, and the guy looks at our tickets and he goes, "Oh, your tickets don't exist." And we're like, "What? What do you mean they don't exist? We paid for them. We have them here in our hands." And he goes, "Well, there's been a mistake and too many tickets were printed. More tickets were printed and sold than what they apparently had." Now, this is the funny part, though. The funny part is they didn't turn us away. They didn't give us back our money. They said, "We'll let you in and you can fend for yourselves."
That would never happen today. Not in a million years.
Exactly. So we just all kind of look at each other and, it was crazy. We thought, okay, well, let's give it a shot. Let's get in there. We came all this way. We're not going to just turn around and leave. So we get in there and we basically had to kind of separate. There was 4 of us and there was no chance we were going to find 4 seats together, right?
Right.
Because by this time the place is packed. And so we basically had to separate and we all had to kind of fend for ourselves. And we all found seats. My one buddy and I had the best score, though, because we were hanging around ringside just checking things out. And I can't remember if the show had started yet, or either the show hadn't started or we were 1 or 2 matches in. And we're in the ringside area, and these 2 clods get into a fight with each other. I don't know. "Oh, yeah, well, Ricky Steamboat's better. Well, I like Jake the Snake." I don't know what it was, but these 2 clods started fighting. And I mean a brawl, like as Gorilla would say, a Pier Sixer. And the security came in and hauled them both out, and we looked at each other, went zoom, and totally grabbed their seats. So I actually sat ringside for the whole show pretty well.
Tell me you brought a camera.
Oh no, I was not. I was never a camera guy, Mike. No, I was never a camera
Dan
guy.
Lovranski.
No, I was never a camera guy. I mean, I got the poster. I got the amazing poster.
We have that poster as part of the post for this week's episode and on our Celebrate Wrestling Instagram and Facebook as well. I mean, even you sending me the poster and the picture of your ticket stub, man, it gave me goosebumps because I'm usually only a nerd for shows that I've been to. Like, I've been trying to collect programs and any promotional posters or anything like that for the shows that I went to in like Red Deer and Edmonton and Calgary and things like that. And then some of the more recent ones, sure, because that's what I want to remember. But man, I saw this poster. First thing I asked you was, can we find a scanner big enough to make a copy of that thing? Because That is a thing of beauty. And some information from this show. So it was at the CNE Stadium, which would eventually go on to be replaced by the Skydome, correct?
Right, that's right.
Okay, but that was where the Jays were playing. Were the Argonauts also playing there?
That's a good question. Again,
Okay.
I'm not really a football guy.
That's fair. All right.
They had big concerts there and other events, but nothing on the scale of this. Like,
Well,
nothing on the scope.
The only shows that even came close to this number for the WWF was Bruce Springsteen and The Who, which in 1986, both acts kind of popular. Just have done some things. The temperature at the start of the event, do you remember this? It says it was 9 degrees Celsius or 48 Fahrenheit. And then by the time the show got rolling, it went down to as low as 5 degrees. There's pictures and shots of people in the crowd in their full winter woolies. Was it that cold?
It was a chilly night, Mike. Yes, it was very chilly night. I remember a lot of people, with like winter coats on and things like that. Because it was end of August, right? So that time of year, although, not anymore. That doesn't seem to happen anymore with our current climate situation. But it was a cold night. But I mean, it certainly didn't stop the fans from getting into it. I mean, you watched it. The crowd was hot for almost everything that happened on that show, and especially by the end, by the time we get to the main event with Hogan and Orndorff, the crowd's just going ballistic. So it was the weather didn't really hold anything back. It wasn't really a factor.
So it's a weird way they've edited it. And this was because it went on to a VHS tape, which if you remember back in the day, a VHS high quality tape, I mean, the best you could hope for is 2 hours.
That's right.
And so they had to edit the thing to keep it under 2 hours. And I think that's how they've posted it on the WWE Vault YouTube channel, because there's one match that gets edited just to brutal context. It was Dick Slater and Mike Sharp.
Yeah.
And they just chop this thing like crazy. We'll get to that, but I mean, no entrances, no walkout, very few walkouts, I should say. And it's just match after match, 11 matches on this card.
It was stacked. It was completely stacked. They pretty well put everybody that was on the roster of note at that time on this card. And it always blows my mind too of how popular and how spectacular this was and how packed it was, because some of those guys that aren't even major principals aren't even there yet. There's no Macho Man Randy Savage. There's no Ted DiBiase. A lot of these guys that come in later on that are some of the big, no Mr. Perfects, the big staples of the promotion aren't even here yet, And so it really was quite amazing that, people were there to see, Haas and Jimmy Jack Funk, It was crazy.
So that's how the show actually starts. On commentary, you've got Gorilla Monsoon, Ernie Ladd, and Johnny Valiant, who, I'm sorry, the commentary nerd me. Yeah, just bad.
Horrible. And Ernie Ladd, I've always had a soft spot for Gorilla. I've always kind of enjoyed his kind of over-the-top style. But yeah, Johnny Valiant, no good. And Ernie Ladd, I don't even know what he was doing there. That is funny, because that's such a holdover from like kind of previous WWF before the expansion, right? Like Ernie Ladd is such a 60s and 70s staple of WWF. And it's funny that they used him on this particular play-by-play session, because really we hadn't seen him on TV. He wasn't around anymore. Like most of the fans, a lot of them wouldn't even known who he was at that point.
It's funny you say that, though, because I actually preferred Ernie Ladd on this. Gorilla is Gorilla. He's always great.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought Ernie, actually, when he had something worth saying, it always made sense. And he was coming at it from the wrestler perspective, so...
Right, and also the kayfabe era is still strongly in place here, right?
Yeah.
And a guy like Ernie Ladd, that was his heyday, was in the very strong kayfabe of the 70s. So of course he's calling it as a legitimate sports event, whereas Johnny Valiant's trying to get his quick one-liners in there and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to even compare it to somebody today. Like I don't even know. It was almost like a bad version of
Taz.
Bobby Heenan, like a bad Bobby Heenan,
I kind of see the same thing with Taz sometimes, that just kind of like seem to be talking just for the mere idea to talk rather than having anything to say.
You and I have differing opinions on Taz. I like Taz.
Okay.
All right.
That's fine.
So we already talked about the Funks, Jimmy Jack and Haas, who I didn't even know spent time in WWF at all.
Very short, very brief. And I have to wonder, where was Terry for this particular show? Because he was the one they brought in first.
Right.
I remember going to the Brantford Civic Center and seeing his debut match on the weekly TV, and then they brought in Dory, and then they brought in Jimmy Jack, who was what was his name now? I can't remember his name. The guy that played Jimmy. Anyways, so yeah, I find it funny that those two were there, but Terry wasn't there. And yeah, Dory was in for like a cup of coffee. I think he saw the writing on the wall and saw how he was going to be treated, right? Like former, NWA champion here in the opening match tag, ridiculous.
So you've got the Funks taking on the Killer Bees, and this was also an interesting time for the Killer Bees of Brian Blair and Jim Brunzell. And we see this in today's pro wrestling too, so it really is a throwback to that. And I mean, we've seen it in other wrestling as well. But they had this thing where the Killer Bees, they would get beat down, then they would get knocked out of the ring, and they would reach under the ring, put on their masks, and then come back, and it was like they were all new guys, even though they weren't. They were just like supercharged Killer Bees.
It was the revitalization of putting that mask on. That was such a common trope in professional wrestling back then for a tag team to have masks, so we don't know which one is which, right. And they can tag in and out because apparently the ref can't tell the body differences between Jim Brunzell and B. Brian Blair. Like, come on.
Well, we'll see a bigger example of that in just a minute here, but another guy, Killer Bees, by the way, win that match. King Tonga, who we would then know as Haku. It's funny, like they're bringing in these guys who we all know today, but they're saying like he prefers to be called Haku now, and it's like I only know him as Haku or Meng, right?
Right.
But I mean Haku all the way, 100%, taking on the magnificent Don Morocco with Mr. Fuji. This one goes a 20-minute draw.
Wow. I guess they didn't want to hurt either guy. Both guys were relatively new to the promotion at that point, too. Both Morocco and Haku. So I think the idea was they didn't want to put a loss on either guy. But it is surprising that an undercard match like that would go to a draw.
Well, and that's just it. Like you said, they probably want him to go Broadway. It also eats up some time, but it was also one of the longest matches on the show, if not the longest. It's funny because the matches themselves didn't last that long. I mean, they were usually 11 to 15 minutes. So another pair of names here, Ted Arcidi versus Tony Gurria. Ted Arcidi, I only know by the LJN action figure. I'd never seen him wrestle a match until I watched this show, okay?
Right.
And it's funny because that's a much talked about LJN figure because he was around for such a short amount of time, too.
Yes.
But Ted Arcidi got this, and it's funny because he actually looks bigger than his action figure looks. Like he was a big dude. Like
he was really big and thick, definitely like that old school pro wrestler, just big, thick barrel type of body, But
he looked like he ate those wrestlers. Like he was just gigantic.
Yeah, he was big. But yeah, you're right. He was just one of those, we all know how Vince was obsessed with bodybuilding and those type of guys that came from that world. And that's why he's got Ted Arcidi in there. But he quickly learns, and we all quickly learn, the guy's got no charisma. The guy can't really wrestle the match properly. So, I mean, at this point, what else is there after that? So, I mean, they tried to put him over, but the fans just weren't buying him.
Well, Arcidi still got over in the match over Tony Gurria. This is the first time I've ever seen Tony Gurria without a suit.
It was obvious that he was there just to do the job for Ted Arcidi.
Well, Tony Gurria, I mean, literally, he's got that old man face that, again, I would always see him ringside as a WWF agent. He was one of the guys who would come out with suits in the 80s. I never knew he even wrestled, and so it's weird. I don't know. It's like seeing pictures of your grandpa at the beach. Like, it's just not a thing you expect to see. Mean Gene Okerlund then interviews Jimmy Hart. They did these little promos as they were on their way to the ring. Jimmy Hart talks about repeatedly how he had his pants pulled down and was branded by Jay White, which I don't know what happened here. I didn't see the program.
Well, that was when they were doing the feud with Funk.
Okay,
with Terry Funk, and Hart was managing Terry Funk, and he was doing the gimmick. When he first came into WWF, that was the gimmick. To cartoon him up, they had him brand his opponents, right? He'd do the jobber match, and he would brand the guy
with the big chaps and everything. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And so anyway, adorable Adrian Adonis, who Gorilla says at the time was literally at his biggest he had ever been. And I think that might have been true. I think he was actually bigger here than he was at WrestleMania 3.
He's huge in this match. Yeah.
Anyways, it was actually the first match on the tape to show an entrance. It was Adonis walking to the ring with no music. JYD gets a clip of his entrance, which is funny because he was all about that song that he had.
That's right. That's right.
The Grab Them Cakes tune, which still is one of the funniest songs to me ever. Anyway, the match goes over with JYD winning by DQ from outside interference from Jimmy Hart. Although they announced the match as a countout for some reason. Who knows?
And that's a match too. When you watch it, crowd is going nuts because again, JYD at that time, he's relatively new to the promotion, but he caught on really quick. He had that amazing charisma that everybody loved, and Vince was really almost like number 2 babyface behind Hulk Hogan at that time, right? So the people were really into that match.
A match that meant nothing, apparently, to the videotape editors. Dick Slater versus Iron Mike Sharp. I think it was great to see Iron Mike Sharp on this card, and Mike Sharp doing the classic, whoa! And for those that never watched Iron Mike Sharp, even in his jobber matches when he would be jobbing out to guys, just loud, always just hollering, and even...
The thing, we got to see Iron Mike Sharp so many times as teenagers because he always worked the TV tapings in Brantford, and we would go, and you'd always, and we loved him. We used to make signs for him, and I used to love it. Like when there was a period where every single shot he threw, he'd yell. He'd like, "Ah!" No matter what he did, he would be yelling and screaming. And he's a guy too, major pedigree. His father and uncle were the Sharp brothers, who were a huge team in the 50s, wrestled in Japan. I always was disappointed, and I don't know what the particulars are, but I was always disappointed that Mike Sharp never got the push he should have. Every once in a while, just to fill time, they would let him do a promo. I remember one he did with Ken Resnick once, and it was amazing. It was hilarious. It was funny. It was charismatic. He's a big guy. He could work in the ring. I just never knew why he didn't get a bigger push.
Don't know, but
maybe it was that forearm that never healed. Must have been that forearm that never healed.
I was just going to say, he had that forearm supporter on. Gorilla Monsoon makes point say he's been wearing it for 8 years now. Well, we then see Slater win. This is actually a pin that I didn't know existed. When I was a kid and I was trying to come up with a wrestling gimmick and everything else. And it's basically the double underarm leg hook where you basically dive over, make a bridge over the guy, and then hook the legs.
Right.
And in my mind, that was always like an unbreakable pin. And turns out everybody kicks out everything these days. But that's how Dick Slater actually won the matches with that pin. I loved it because I was like, that's straight out of my childhood brain,
And that's another guy too, Dick Slater, that was basically in for like a cup of coffee. He wasn't in for long. In fact, I don't even remember any major feuds that Dick Slater had in the WWF.
We have another one of those pre-match promos, Gene Okerlund and Bobby Heenan talking. Wrestling is Heenan and Heenan is wrestling. Bobby Heenan, just such a master, and a couple times really gets the crowd worked up. I don't want 70,000 people out here calling me Weasel. And of course it's on the PA, so what happens, right? I mean, just a master class in working the fans at the time. I mean, this is what made Bobby Heenan so great. He was actually on his way for his match. It was going to be himself, Big John Studd, and King Kong Bundy taking on the Machines and Captain Lou Albano. Now, they build it as Giant Machine and Super Machine, and we'll go through the Machines here in a second because I need more clarity on this from you. But Super Machine was Bill Eadie of Demolition.
That's right.
Okay. Giant Machine, was Andre, but this was still babyface Andre.
Right, that's right.
And then Blackjack Mulligan wrestled as Big Machine. So Big Machine and Super Machine actually wrestled the match, but then Giant Machine was on the outside. And then you had Studd, King Kong Bundy, and Heenan. Studd and Bundy and Heenan win by DQ after the Giant Machine interferes and bumps Heenan around like Kurt Hennig. For those that only know Bobby Heenan from his later years as a commentator and stuff, when he was heel managing and he'd do those wrestling matches, that dude bounced around like a freaking bouncy ball.
Him and Adrian Adonis had that spectacular method of, I don't know if it was their center of gravity or the way they were built, but they were just amazing at that stuff. And Heenan had been a wrestler too. Let's remember that, right? Bobby Heenan did wrestle in the 70s and that as well. But he somehow he got those, like when he would, the heel or the baby face would be chasing him and he would do that leap over the top rope to the floor.
Yeah.
Like that would just be spectacular, and throw him in the corner and bump to the outside. Like that was a big part of what made him so much fun to watch, besides the talking, because when he had to, man, he could perform and it was spectacular. Unfortunately, that's what leads to him doing nothing but commentary, because he eventually develops neck issues and has to kind of step away from that role.
So for the machines, and I need you to explain this to me a little further, because this was right before I started getting into wrestling, and I remember seeing the tape for the big event and going, that makes no sense. Hulk Hogan's wearing white. I don't know what that is. But and he's not in the show, but that was the picture they had on it. Anyways, so you had Bill Eadie, who clearly wasn't doing anything yet with Demolition, because that had
no, he had just been the Masked Superstar before this in other promotions, right?
Blackjack Mulligan, again, kind of the same situation. But Captain Lou was bringing in these machines, and there was a big campaign on that Bobby Heenan was trying to prove the giant machine was Andre, and if he could, then Andre would be suspended for life.
Right.
So somehow that changes when the heel turn happens, obviously, with Andre and Hogan. But until then, was that the feud? Was Heenan and Andre, or?
Well, it was just kind of I think it's because he had Bundy and Stud, right? And it plays off the whole thing with, remember we had Stud and Andre at the first WrestleMania, and that was always an ongoing feud. See, back in those days, they would manage to keep things going. It's like, okay, you beat my man Stud, okay, I'm bringing in Bundy now, and they continue to go after Andre, right? So that's really what it was. It was kind of like a personal vendetta thing that Heenan wanted to take Andre out of wrestling. The funniest thing for me with the machines is what happens after this. And they start to do house shows, and we get Animal Machine, and we get Piper Machine when Piper turns babyface. And I think they even did Hulk Machine at one of them as well, right? So eventually, it just becomes this big running gag as who are the machines. Like even for that era with the kayfabe, they just took it so far with this thing with the machines. And eventually, I don't even remember the culmination of it, if there was one. I think it just kind of fades away, and that's it, right?
Yeah, and another name that was apparently part of the machines, Crusher Lazowski. Do you remember a Crusher machine?
No, I don't.
That's
that you know what? That was probably very regional. That was probably like in Minneapolis or Minnesota or somewhere like that, where they're playing to the. That was probably like one night only. If that happened, it was probably for one night only.
All right. Well, we're talking about the big event from 1986, locally marketed as Hulkamania. Dan Lovranski was there. We've talked about the crowds. We've talked about the cold. And these matches are just incredible. Jake the Snake Roberts versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in a snake pit no DQ match. Jake billed at 249 pounds here. And this was one of the few times that you could actually buy into that with Jake, because he did have the height over Ricky. Ricky looked so stacked, and I remember when I first met Jake Roberts, I couldn't believe how tall he was.
Yes, yeah.
And you never really felt that, because he'd be usually wrestling taller guys, or he did a good job of making himself seem undersized, and he had that svelte figure too, right? But this was Jake probably in his prime. Ricky Steamboat delivers. And even though they dubbed over it on the YouTube channel, he came out to his serious music. Did Ricky Steamboat.
Right.
I loved this match.
Yeah.
I really thought it was a great match. Not a ton.
It was one of the highlights for us live as well, when we all found each other after we all found each other at the end of the night. It was we were all raving about that match. We all loved it. And you have to remember too that match gets over huge, not only because they had built it up well, but again, those are two guys that were also in Mid-Atlantic. And you have to remember that the Toronto territory, before Vince moves in with the expansion, is the Mid-Atlantic. So a lot of the guys like, Piper and Jake and Steamboat and that were already well known to the Toronto audiences.
And Ricky gets slingshotted at one point into the outside, on the pole on the outside. And only because you know what to look for these days, you see him gig himself, and that's where he actually gets some color, gets some blood, and even busted open, manages to get a roll-up win on Jake. It was a great match. I mean, a little silly finish, but not overly, because Jake was playing the confident heel, and he does a nonchalant cover and Ricky basically cradles him and, pins the shoulders, and that gets the pin. But the heel fans were cheering Jake. You can actually hear them quite audibly on the tape.
You have to remember, too, and honestly, me and my buddies were the same. At that time,
it might have been you, to be honest. I don't know who it was, but
you never know. At that time, we loved the heels just because the heels, most of them at that time, think about it, they're so charismatic. Bobby Heenan, Jake the Snake Roberts, like they're all these really great charismatic characters, and they were allowed to do the real talking. Back then, guys like Steamboat and that had to kind of do that Bob Backlund, mom and apple pie, babyface stuff, and it's really hard even then to engage fans with that. Whereas, Jake would get up there and go, yeah, I'm the personification of evil, and evil works in many different ways. Like, you'd just be like, wow, this guy's fantastic, man. I can't wait to see this guy. So, yeah, we were cheering. You notice it in the Orndorff-Hogan match, too.
I want to continue down the card here. There's only a few left, but this one, I mean, considering the guys that were in it, and you talked about how Vince McMahon obviously loved the big jacked guys, Billy Jack Haynes and Hercules Hernandez. Now, this was supposed to be kind of a power struggle match between the two. They would have that full Nelson off at WrestleMania and everything, but this was, by modern standards, it would be one of those meat versus meat matches. But these two guys just kind of did their thing. To me, it seemed a little slower. It was also thrown off a bit because it sounded like Gorilla had to redo the commentary on the tape and redid it on his own in the studio because the audio difference is just completely different. So a little taken out of this one. Billy Jack wins by backslide pinfall. Do you remember anything outstanding about this match?
Not really. Like you said, again, two guys that never really clicked. They tried hard with Hercules. They put him with Bobby Heenan when he first came in, and which usually would guarantee something, but he just never really caught on. And same with Billy Jack Haynes. Those guys just really didn't catch on up here. They weren't particularly charismatic guys. And the match, it's only going to be what you call the meat match because they're both muscle bound. It's not like a Steamboat and a Jake where they can kind of pull off some stuff. They're pretty limited in what they can do. And again, Vince loved that strongman thing. So yeah, let's do it. Strongman versus strongman.
The Rougeau brothers versus the dream team of Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine. Rougeau's, of course, being in the Toronto area there, not that far from Montreal and Quebec, over like Rover with a lot of the fans here. Rougeau's get the win on that. I want to jump right to the next match here, though, and that is Pedro Morales versus King or Handsome Harley Race. Now, Harley had come in as the king of wrestling. He was wearing the purple tights, but they were really getting over Handsome Harley Race. I mean, there were stories that Harley, I won't say hated, but, just felt like a fish out of water, I think, playing the cartoon King a little bit. And so really pushing the Handsome Harley Race thing. The commentary put him over. He was announced as Handsome Harley Race, and he wins with the legs on the rope by what almost seemed like a 4 count. The ref went so hard down onto the mat for the first pinfall. But, I mean, this is a time where Pedro Morales, once, WWF champion, clearly on his way out.
Yep.
And Harley Race clearly just on his way up, but also wouldn't end up staying in WWF that much longer.
No. Again, Harley Race, a fish out of water in the WWF. I mean, he comes from that whole background of being tough and being mean and being the guy that if you catches you in the alley and you run him the wrong way, he's going to beat the living crap out of you. And they just turned him into such a cartoon. And I don't know if this was one of those personal vendetta things with Vince, because he seemed to have this real thing where a lot of these legendary guys would come in and he would just turn them into ridiculous caricatures. Yeah, King Harley Race, he had a crown, he had a purple robe. He did that ridiculous match with Hacksaw Jim Duggan at the Slammies and stuff like that. And I remember, and again, for me, younger, this is my first time seeing Harley Race, and I've seen him in all the magazines and I've read this stuff, and he was NWA champion and all this, and you look at him and they made him such a joke. I was like, why? I used to think, why was this guy so popular? What was it about this guy that was so great? Because Vince just kind of took away all the stuff that was great about Harley Race and turned him into a cartoon, much the same he did with Dusty Rhodes. But you have to hand it. I don't know so much for Harley, but you have to hand it to guys like Dusty, because whatever they were given, they would try to make their best out of it, right? They would try to do their best. And I think with Harley, it was just a bit of a like, no, this is not right for me. I don't fit in here. And, he wasn't there for long.
All right, our main event, as advertised on the poster, which we'll talk about after this, but Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff. Now, this is a time where if you watch it, you think, oh, they screwed up. They played Hogan's music too early. No, Orndorff was on this thing saying that he should be the real world's champion.
Right.
He even stole Hogan's music. He stole his mannerisms. So both guys come out to the same song. They just let it roll because it wasn't the time where you could just skip back automatically, I guess. I don't know. But Orndorff comes out to Real American, then Hogan follows. And it's crazy. We always see these pictures of Hogan with his bandana in his mouth where he's like chewing on it and biting into it. I realized during this show, the reason why he's biting into that bandana isn't to look cool and savage. I mean, it helps, but there were so many people that were trying to grab that thing off his head when he was coming down the aisle.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like, it really, Hulkamania was an appropriate term. That's what it was. It was like Beatlemania or something, right? And it's the same thing. The girls tried to rip all the Beatles clothes off, and anyone would try. People would love to cry. I remember little kids when we would go to the TV tapings in Brantford. They would just want to touch them.
Yeah.
And they'd always want to do it at the end of the match when they're covered in sweat. And me and my buddies used to think that's the most ridiculous thing, but that was such. It was like the only way to make an actual connection with this guy was to touch him. And so for a lot of fans, when they're that wound up, that's what they try to do.
Can you imagine whoever would have got that headband, though? It would have been nuts. Orndorff, works his butt off in this match as well. Hogan taking some crazy bumps, too. Even takes a suplex, even though it was on like the gym mat on the outside of the ring. They're on one of those raised stage floors, too. So
Yeah, it was kind of a platform with steps leading up, and then the platform, and then the ring on the platform.
But Hogan gets the win by DQ. And again, a weird finish, because there's already been outside interference. Hogan's been assaulted, everything else. But what happens is Orndorff covers Hogan for a 20 count.
Yes, he had him down for a long time because they did the classic ref has been knocked out.
The ref saunters over or glides or whatever you want to say, like drags himself over there. And instead of doing the 3 count on the canvas, does a 3 count on Orndorff's shoulder, which you would assume might be a pin or might not, but at the same time, it's not a pin. Orndorff thinks it is. They're putting the belt on him. He's celebrating. And no, the referee then says that Orndorff has been disqualified due to outside interference, and Hogan thusly is still champion. So there's a big beatdown afterwards. Hogan recovers, and the fans go banana. But
yeah, no, it was crazy. I just remember the crowd being so hot when Heenan runs in with the stool and corks Hogan with the wooden stool. I mean, the crowd just went insane. And again, if you watch at ringside, there are a whole ton of people cheering when it looked like Orndorff actually had won the belt.
Oh, they were loving it. They were loving it. I now know that one of those people were Dan Lovranski. So
it is, because you know what?
We got to look for you. We got to look for you.
As much as I loved all of it, me and my buddies were tired of Hogan already because it was such a one-dimensional thing. Sure, he was charismatic to the average Joe, but his in-ring was not spectacular. And I always hated it the way other guys would have to rework their style to work with Hogan. And so me and my buddies, we popped huge too, because we thought, oh my God, we're finally going to get to see him lose the belt. But of course, it did not happen.
So that is the big event on the WWE Vault YouTube channel. Now, we've only got a couple minutes, Dan, but I know you want to talk about this poster, which you can see pictures of on our Celebrate Wrestling social media. First of all, the ticket prices. Walk us through those really quick.
Well, it's insane. The highest price is $20.
Right.
That was the top ticket, $20. That's what me and my buddies played. I find it amazing, too, again, the way wrestling was perceived then. They had a $10 ticket for seniors.
Oh, yeah.
Which I thought kind of interesting, right? That they would have a specific lower ticket price for seniors. But again, we're just making the transition with the expansion. And a lot of wrestling up until that time was older people rather than kids. So I found that interesting. And the best thing, though, is, do you remember the convenience stores Becker's?
Yes.
Okay. Somehow Becker's got tied into the promotion, and this poster was in every Becker's in Southern Ontario. Like, even the small town I grew up had the Becker's with this poster hanging in it. So I think that was also another big part of why it was so huge, is because the promotion for it was out of this world. Not only did they promote it on the TV, but they had these posters hanging, and at that time, Becker's was the convenience store giant chain. Like they were the giant. It wasn't 7-Eleven, it wasn't Circle K.
Yeah.
It was Becker's. They were huge. And you saw this poster in every single one of them. So the one in my hometown, the very next day after we got back, I went to the store and I just said to the guy, "Look, man, can I have that poster?" And yeah, he goes, "Yeah, sure." Just gave it to me. So
Dan the Mouth Lovranski telling us what it's like to be at the big event back in 1986. Again, you can watch it on the WWE Vault YouTube channel, which is what I did. It's a 2-hour show. It's not all great. Like, you're not getting a All In or a WrestleMania.
Oh God,
or
no,
like that.
no.
But at
no.
the same time, I mean, if it's I felt like I was watching like a time capsule, like a legit time capsule at a time before. Everybody uses WrestleMania 3 as that big benchmark event, right? But this was the big event before the big event, and it's obviously why it's called that. But at the same time, it was something so radically special, and it shows you the upswing. Like, Hogan wasn't even doing big boot leg drop as like a big taunted finisher, you know, like he'd never hit it in this match. But at the same time, it's like everything else is just everybody's with it. So
it had to be one of the events. I'm guessing it had to be one of the events that convinced McMahon to go for the big stadium for WrestleMania 3, because this was in August. WrestleMania 3 would have been in March or April or whatever. And I think the success of this really said to Vince, wow, okay, I can pull this off. I mean, it was Toronto, one of the biggest wrestling cities ever, but I think it really convinced him, wow, we've got momentum and we can do a stadium-style show.
Well, that's probably what helped them choose Detroit too, being so close. So.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of Toronto fans could go. Exactly.
All right, Dan, always a pleasure to have you on here. Again, if you want to see the pictures of the poster and the tickets and stuff, head to our social media. But you're still doing your own radio stuff as well, and there's something pretty cool going on with your show.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention my music show. It's on CIUT 89.5 FM in Southern Ontario. But for those of you around the rest of the world, you can just go to CIUT.FM. I'm on Saturdays at noon for 2 hours. That's Eastern Standard Time. And I know you'll like this, Mike. Through the years, I was such a hardcore collector. I would sit there on Saturdays with a VHS machine and tape promos or matches or whatever. So I went through all these tapes and put everything on cassette when I used to do radio back in the 90s and when we were doing the law. So now I finally got all those cassettes digitized, and I have tons of amazing, great promos that are all mostly for the Toronto market with Billy Red Lions, with a lot of these classic guys, and they're not ones you can find on YouTube, and you really can't hear them anywhere else. And I'm going to start featuring them because rock and roll and wrestling, as we all know, goes together so well. And I'm just having a ball. Even now, just going through the tapes and picking out ones I'm going to play, I'm having a ball. So for you wrestling fans, I think you might want to check out some of those.
Well, you know what? If you can't stream it live, I know it posts as well. But, Dan, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There's always room for the mouth on the Celebrate Wrestling podcast feed. I'm just saying, if you want to get some extra ears on stuff, you've always got a home here, man. You've always got a home. And I won't even make you talk about modern-day wrestling. It's all good. Just saying. You're kind of like the missing component here. And so, I mean, if we ever want to get, Dr. Mouth back on a podcast feed with wrestling, you got to
never know, Mike. Never, as they say in wrestling, never say never.
All right, well, there you go. Dan the Mouth Lovranski. Mouth, thank you very much. Can you please end this segment with the traditional
brother?